Otranto, seen here on her way back to the United Kingdom on her final voyage. She's passing Orion, whose deck officers all gather on the bridge to watch and to send her on her way with a salvo of rockets. Otranto was one of 5 Orient liners of 20,000 tons, built to replace tonnage lost in the First World War. Sadly, 3 of her sisters were to be lost in the Second Great Conflict: Oriana, Orford and Oronsay. The rockets are fired and whistles blown as the 2 ships pass. In a few moments, Otranto will disappear into the distance. We join Orontes in Adelaide, an officer and a writer walking towards us. The last of 5 20,000-tonners, Orontes only differed from her sisters with her curved and more modern bow. She's seen here at sea, a similar shot to the earlier one of Otranto. You'll see the likeness. Orontes was painted in the old Orient Line colours of black hull, white superstructure and buff funnels. Now in Fremantle, Orontes is dressed overall, ready to depart on her final voyage home. A helicopter flies past and lands on HMS Bullock, also visiting the port. We normally carried a number of young passengers on a voyage back to the homeland, as it was known, but on this, the last voyage, passengers were also booked by a number of people who had fond memories of the ship, of past voyages, sometimes romantic voyages. Captain Riddlesdale, affectionately known as Woof Woof, waves from the bridge of the ship as it moves out to sea. Another shot of Orontes at an earlier date in Adelaide. And now we see her in Aden, taken from a tender. You see her lovely lines and the poop deck right aft. From Aden, the ship sailed up the Red Sea to Suez, through the canal and to Port Said, where she was surrounded by numerous bumboats selling their wares of camel leather saddles, inlaid cigarette boxes, Turkish delight and many other Egyptian souvenirs. In early March 1962, the ship is pulled away from her berth in Tilbury docks towards the loch and the Thames estuary. Her decks are covered in snow. She is bound for Valencia in the scrapyard with 79 souls aboard, including 9 of the officers' wives. Seagulls are fussing around her as she moves out. Off Gravesend, a tug gives her a good blast on the ship's whistle to say farewell. And gradually the ship moves down the river, bathed in the evening sunlight. We see Orion at the pier in Pyrmont, Sydney Harbour. Orion was the first ship to be built with the new Orient Line colours of buff hull, white superstructure and a buff funnel. Built in 1934, Orion was the first Orient liner to be released back to the company in 1946 after trooping during the war. Later in the late 50s we see her promenade, B-deck, with its broad wooden decking. A young passenger has a go at steering, supervised by a navigating officer. A VIP indeed, he's cradled by Captain Britain. The young lady, being instructed in the use of a sextant, is one of the female officers of the purser's or surgeon's staff off duty. One problem with Orion was the smuts emanating from the thick black smoke belching from her funnel. It doesn't seem to put off these young ladies basking in the tropical sun on the Sunday. In the pool, children were supervised by the children's hostess and the stewardess. Orion is seen here in Aden, a port where numerous ships call in for bunkering. Our final shots are taken from on board ship as she's pulled in towards the Tilbury Lock. You can see the railway bridge being hoisted to let the ship pass into the docks. You'll also see the well-manicured lawns kept by the lock keepers. Soon she'll be berthed in Tilbury Dock, unloading her passengers and cargo and getting ready for the next voyage out to Australia. Orchides, the first Orient Line ship to be launched after the Second World War, built with her sister Oronsay and later Orsova to replace ships lost during that earlier conflict. Here Orchides is seen coming into Hong Kong, shots taken from aboard Iberia, which will be berthed alongside in Kowloon. You notice the old junks with their sails and oars. Orchides passing at sea. Note the Welsh bonnet atop the funnel to keep smuts off the upper decks. Passengers seen strolling ashore on a Mediterranean cruise. The ship is in Malta, and the ship's boats are being used to ferry passengers back and forth. We leave Orchides at sea. Our first film of Oronsay is of her anchored whilst cruising in the Mediterranean. The next shows her tied up in Honolulu. You'll see the reflection of the ship in the clear waters of the harbour. Soon we'll catch a quick glimpse of her at the new passenger terminal at Circular Quay, Sydney, before we see her leaving stern first from her berth in Pyrmont, the other side of the harbour bridge. Oronsay slowly turns, pulled and pushed by tugs, before heading for the bridge and the open seas on yet another exciting passage. Some well-wishers will board a ferry to steam alongside as she makes her way to the heads. Rough seas greet her as she leaves the shelter of the land. Later on, flags are raised to the masthead as she enters a new port. And once again at sea, passengers gather around the pool, ready for the aquatic sports, which may account for the numbers already in the water. Here are some shots taken from the bridge, and inside the wheelhouse you'll note the ship's wheel and the telegraph equipment, now obsolete in many modern cruise ships. Oronsay passes Orchides at sea. Rockets are fired as greetings between the two liners. Here, Oronsay is seen berthed on a Pacific voyage in Suva. Later, she'll make her way north to Vancouver, where she's seen here. And we leave Oronsay in warmer climes. Our first pictures of Orsover were taken in the early morning by passengers leaving the ship in Suez to take the excursion to Cairo and the pyramids. The ship will later transit the canal, and the passengers will rejoin the ship in Port Said. In another canal, this time the Panama Canal, we watch from the deck as the mechanical mules pull her through a lock. Some of the officers join the passengers to watch. Our next film shows her in Tilbury, preparing for her next voyage to Australia and beyond. Finally, passengers are leaving her by boat to tour some sunny Mediterranean port. Oriana, the last of the liners built for the Orient Line, enters Colombo Harbour on her way from Sydney to Southampton. She's pictured here from the bridge of Orion, and you can see her decks are lined with passengers watching her entry. After her sea trials, Oriana entered dry dock in Cornwall. You will see that she's still without her Elizabeth motif below the crown on her bow. then moved to Southampton before her maiden voyage, and you see that the motive is now in place. Well-wishers wave her goodbye and tugs fuss around her as she pulls out and slowly steams down Southampton water. Here she's seen in the Australian Bight, renowned for its lumpy seas. She's on her third voyage outward bound, passing Orontes inward bound on her last before she goes to the breakers. A shot of the promenade deck, below the lifeboats, which were arranged here for the first time on an Orient liner. It's common practice on cruise ships today. A lovely shot as the port anchor splashes into the sea. Finally we see her here in Southampton with some boats lowered for a Board of Trade inspection.